After hours of staring at textbooks, my brain felt like mush. I needed a break. A snack run to the 24-hour convenience store down the street seemed perfect. It was past midnight, and the streets were eerily empty. The cold air bit at my face as I hurried along the pavement, my breath visible in the chilly night. The fluorescent lights of the store were a welcome sight, and I pushed through the doors, greeted by the familiar ding. The store was almost deserted. Only the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional rustle of packaging broke the silence. I wandered the aisles aimlessly, my mind still foggy from hours of studying. Grabbing a few items, I made my way to the chips aisle, craving the salty crunch of my favorite snack, Pringles. As I reached for a can, something caught my eye at the end of the aisle. A woman stood there, her back to me. Her appearance was disheveled, long, greasy hair that clung to her face, and a torn, dirty dress that hung loosely on her gaunt frame. She seemed to be muttering something under her breath, her hands twitching as she hovered near the shelves. I froze, the can of Pringles halfway to my basket. The woman turned slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. They were wild, bloodshot, and filled with a disturbing intensity. Her lips moved rapidly as she repeated the same word over and over, Pringles, Pringles, Pringles. My heart raced, but I forced myself to look away, focusing on the shelves in front of me. The last thing I wanted was to engage with someone who seemed so unhinged. But I couldn't shake the feeling of her eyes boring into me. I decided to ignore her, picking up a few more items and heading towards the checkout. But as I rounded the corner, there she was again, standing directly in my path. Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated as she stared at the Pringles can in my hand. The muttering had stopped, replaced by a low growl emanating from her throat. "Hey, do you want these?" I stammered, holding out the can in a shaky attempt to appease her. Maybe if I gave her what she wanted, she'd leave me alone. Her response was immediate and violent. She lunged at me, her nails scratching at my face as she tried to wrestle the can from my grip. The force of her attack sent us both crashing into the shelves, scattering bags of chips and other snacks across the floor. I screamed, desperately trying to fend her off, but she was unnaturally strong, her face twisted in a frenzy. We struggled on the floor, her hands clawing at my skin. I could feel her nails digging into my flesh, drawing blood. Panic took over, and I blindly grabbed at anything I could reach, hurling a jar of salsa at her head. It shattered on impact, and she screamed in rage, momentarily disoriented. Seizing the opportunity, I scrambled to my feet, slipping on the scattered snacks as I bolted down the aisle. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran towards the exit, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the woman was right behind me, her crazed chanting growing louder with each step. Just as I reached the door, a security guard appeared out of nowhere, tackling her to the ground. They struggled briefly before he subdued her, pinning her arms behind her back as she continued to scream and thrash. I collapsed against the door, panting and trembling. Other customers began to gather, their faces a mix of shock and horror as they witnessed the chaotic scene. The store's manager called the police, who arrived shortly after and took the woman away. The next morning, the news reported that she was a local woman who had fallen on hard times, homeless, mentally unstable, and starving. But no amount of explanation could erase the terror I felt that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see her face, twisted in that maniacal grin, her chant echoing in my mind, Pringles, Pringles, Pringles.